The dust was a living thing, a malevolent spirit risen from the parched throat of the earth. It coated everything in a fine red powder, a shroud for the dying hopes of redemption gulch. It clung to the sweat on Elara Vance's brow as she stood on the porch of her family's homestead, her knuckles white where she gripped the weathered rail. Before her, in the barren yard, stood the reason for the town's name, a place where souls came seeking a second chance and so often found only a final judgment. Today, judgment had arrived in a polished black carriage, drawn by two magnificent black horses that seemed to suck the very light from the afternoon. Bartholomew Thorne stepped down from the carriage, his bulk casting a greedy shadow that fell long across the dirt. He was a man built of stolen land and broken promises, his face a fleshy map of avarice, his eyes small and hard like pebbles in a pig's trough. He did not look at Elara's father, a man bent and brittle as a dead cornstalk, but at her. His gaze was an appraisal, the kind a man gives a prize mare at auction. It was a look that stripped and weighed and owned. The town was there, too. They stood in a loose, silent semicircle, their faces grim and sun-cracked. The cowardly crowd. They were farmers and merchants, blacksmiths and stable hands, all bound by the same chains of debt to Thorne. They had come not to support the Vances, but to witness their fall, a grim reminder of their own precarious existence. They were here to watch the lion devour the lamb, and to be grateful, for one more day, that they were not the ones being eaten. Abel, Thorne's voice was slick with false civility, a layer of oil on a stagnant pond. The note is due. The last extension has expired. You know the terms. Elara's father, Abel Vance, coughed, a dry, rattling sound that shook his frail frame. Just a little more time, Bartholomew. The rains, they have to come. Thorne chuckled, a low, unpleasant rumble. Hope doesn't pay the bank, Abel. Nor does it pay me. He took a step closer, his eyes never leaving Elara. The deed. Or the full amount. $500, $500. It might as well have been the moon. The drought had killed their crops, the blight had sickened their cattle. They had nothing. Less than nothing. Elara felt a cold dread snake around her heart. She had known this day was coming, had watched it approach like a distant storm cloud, growing darker and larger until it blotted out the sun. Thorne's gaze lingered on her, heavy and suffocating. Of course, he said, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial purr, there are other ways to settle a debt. A man of my standing needs a wife. A young, healthy wife to manage my estate. The implication hung in the air, thick and foul as slaughterhouse smoke. The crowd shifted, a collective murmur of shame and fear rippling through them. They would do nothing. They couldn't. Sheriff Brody stood near the edge of the gathering, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol, his face a mask of conflict. He was a lawman with a conscience, a terrible combination in a town owned by a man without one. He was bound to uphold the law, and the law, in this case, was a piece of paper in Thorne's pocket. The law was a weapon, and Thorne was pointing it at the heart of the Vance family. Elara stepped forward, moving to stand in front of her father. Her fear was a cold, hard knot in her stomach, but her voice, when she spoke, was steady. We will not be selling my father's land, Mr. Thorne. And I am not for sale. Thorne's smile was a predator's grimace. Spirit. I admire that. It will be broken, of course. But I do admire it. He gestured to two of his hired men, brutish figures who had dismounted from their horses. Take the deed, boys. Abel, sign it over, or we'll take it by force and you'll be charged with obstruction. It was at that moment, as the two thugs started toward the porch, that another rider appeared. He came not from the road, but from the shimmering heat of the open range, a silent apparition coalescing out of the dust and glare. He rode a powerful buckskin horse, and he sat in the saddle with an unnatural stillness, a man who seemed more a part of the landscape than an intruder upon it. He was dressed in tailored but practical clothes that spoke of wealth, yet his bearing was not that of a city man. His face was weathered, his features sharp and angular, framed by long, dark hair tied back with a leather cord. But it was his eyes that captured the attention of everyone present. They were the color of dark, polished obsidian, and they held a stillness, a profound and ancient calm that seemed utterly at odds with the tension of the moment. He was Comanche. No one could mistake the high cheekbones, the proud set of his jaw. A tremor of a different kind of fear went through the crowd. Thorn turned, irritated by the interruption. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. The stranger did not answer immediately. He dismounted with a fluid grace, his boots making no sound in the thick dust. He led his horse to the Vance's half-empty water trough and let it drink, an act of quiet deliberation that was somehow more commanding than any shouted word. His gaze swept over the scene, Thorn's sneering face, Abel's despair, the craven townspeople, Sheriff Brody's troubled stillness. And then his eyes found Ilara. For a fraction of a second, the unnerving calm in their depths was broken by something else, a flicker of an emotion she couldn't name. It was ancient and deep, a recognition that vibrated in the air between them. Then it was gone, shuttered away behind that stoic mask. He turned his attention back to Thorn. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and resonant, carrying across the yard with an effortless authority that cut through the tension like a keen blade. "My name is Kai," he said. "And I am here on business," Thorn scoffed. "I have no business with you, boy." "This is a private matter, it is a public spectacle," Kai corrected him, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "And it concerns the Vance family." "That makes it my business." He walked past Thorn's thugs as if they were statues, stopping at the foot of the porch steps. He looked up at Ilara, then at her father. "I hear you have a debt," he said, the words a simple statement of fact. Abel Vance could only nod, his hopes so thoroughly crushed that he couldn't even muster curiosity. Thorn laughed, a harsh, braying sound. "He has a debt he can't pay. $500. Unless you've got that in your saddlebags, Injun, I suggest you ride on before you get hurt." Kai's gaze remained on Ilara. He saw the tremor in her hand as she held the porch rail, but he also saw the unyielding strength in her spine. He saw the ghost of a little girl with dirt on her cheek and compassion in her eyes. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and produced a leather billfold. The crowd gasped. It was thick with currency. He didn't count it. He simply held it out. "I will pay this debt," he said, his words falling into a stunned silence. Thorn's jaw went slack. Sheriff Brody straightened up, his eyes wide. Ilara stared, her mind reeling. Who was this man? Why would a complete stranger, a Comanche stranger at that, ride out of nowhere and offer a fortune to save them? Thorn recovered quickly, his greed overriding his surprise. Well, he sneered, though a flicker of unease crossed his face. "A rich redskin. I'll be damned," he gestured to one of his men. "Take the money. Count it." As the man took the billfold, Kai's eyes met Thorn's. There was no anger in his gaze, no triumph. There was only a cold, hard promise, a silent declaration that this was not the end of their business, but merely the beginning. And in that moment, Ilara Vance knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the arrival of this stranger was not just about a debt. A much older and more dangerous account was about to be settled. Kai took a room at the Redemption boarding house, a clean but threadbare establishment run by Martha, a widow with kind eyes and a spine of prairie steel. She was the town's kind stranger, a woman who measured a man by his character, not the color of his skin or the weight of his purse. While the rest of the town whispered and stared, she gave him the best room and asked no questions. Over the next few days, Kai became a silent fixture in the town. He spoke little, but he watched everything. He saw the way Thorn's influence poisoned every interaction, the way honest men lowered their eyes when he passed, the way fear was the true currency of this place. He bought supplies from the general store, paying with crisp new bills that made the proprietor's hands tremble. He spoke with the blacksmith about shoeing his horse, and the man, initially wary, found himself talking to Kai about the poor quality of the last iron shipment, a problem caused by Thorn's monopoly on freight contracts. Kai listened, his expression unreadable, filing away each piece of the town's despair. His purpose remained a mystery, a source of intense speculation. Why had he paid the Vance debt? Was he an investor? A government agent? A fool with more money than sense? The town couldn't decide. But his presence had shifted the suffocating atmosphere. It was like a single drop of clean water in a stagnant pool, It hadn't cleared the water, but it had created a ripple, a possibility of change. Ilara was consumed by the same questions. The relief of her family's salvation was mingled with a profound and unsettling curiosity. She found herself watching for him, catching glimpses of his tall, solitary figure as he walked the town's single dusty street. There was a gravity about him, a sense of deep, contained sorrow that she found herself inexplicably drawn to. She owed him everything, yet she knew nothing about him. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, she saw him walking out toward the low hills that bordered the edge of the plains. On impulse, she followed, keeping a respectful distance. He stopped at a small, windswept rise that overlooked the valley, a place marked by a few gnarled, ancient junipers. He stood there for a long time, as still as the stones around him, a silhouette against the fading light. He was not admiring the view. He was mourning. She could feel it, a palpable wave of grief that emanated from him. Ilara didn't approach. She retreated, her heart aching with a borrowed sorrow. This man was not just a savior, he was a ghost, haunted by something far older than her family's troubles. That night, Kai sat by the window in his boarding house room, the silence of the town pressing in around him. He did not light the lamp. He preferred the darkness. It was an old friend. In the quiet, the memories he kept so tightly leashed came for him. He closed his eyes and he was a boy again, 10 years old, his world a kaleidoscope of fire and screams. It was not a battle, it was a slaughter. Blue-coated soldiers, their faces twisted with a righteous fury he would never understand, swept through his village like a plague. He remembered the smell of burning lodges, the sharp, metallic tang of blood in the air. He remembered his mother pushing him into a thicket of scrub oak, her last words a fierce whisper in his ear, "Live, Kai." Survive. He had watched from the thorns as she was cut down. He had run, fueled by a terror that was absolute. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs gave out, a stray bullet having torn through his side. He collapsed at the edge of a dry creek bed, the world dissolving into a haze of pain and fever. He lay there for a day, maybe two, drifting in and out of consciousness, waiting for the end. He was dying. He knew it with the simple, unblinking certainty of a child. And then, she appeared. A small girl with hair the color of sun-cured hay and eyes as blue as the prairie sky. She had been gathering firewood and had stumbled upon him. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She looked at him, and he saw not fear, but a startling, profound pity. He remembered the tattered wool blanket she carried, a patchwork of faded blues and grays. Without a word, she knelt and draped it over his trembling body. Her hands were small and gentle. She reached into the pocket of her pinafore and pulled out a piece of cornbread wrapped in a cloth. She pushed it into his hand. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, they were not a Comanche boy and a white girl. They were just two children, sharing a moment of grace in a world that had none. Then she was gone, scared off by the sound of her father calling her name, Ilara. That single act of kindness became the anchor for his soul. The blanket was his warmth, the bread his strength. It gave him the will to crawl, to find water, to keep moving until he was found by a band of Kiowa hunters who took him in. He had survived. He had learned. He had prospered, finding a strange path in the white man's world of trade and commerce, using their own tools to amass a fortune, all of it driven by a single, burning purpose, to one day return and repay a debt that was worth more than all the gold in the territories. The memory of her face, of her small, brave act of mercy, was the sacred fire he had carried in his heart for 15 years. He had returned to find her facing a different kind of monster, a man in a suit instead of a blue coat, but a killer of hope all the same. He had come to repay her for the blanket. He had come to give her back her world, just as she had given him his. He opened his eyes, the room now deep in shadow. Thorn was a symptom of the sickness that had destroyed his people, a greed that saw land and people as things to be owned and discarded. He would not just save Ilara from this man. He would root out the sickness from this town. For her. For the memory of that little girl. Meanwhile, Thorn was not a man to accept defeat, especially a public one at the hands of a man he considered his inferior. Kai's payment of the Vance debt was a direct challenge to his authority. He saw Kai not as a benefactor, but as a rival. He began to apply pressure. The blacksmith who had spoken to Kai found his next shipment of iron lost on the trail. The general store owner was reminded of his own outstanding loans. Whispers started, vicious, ugly rumors about Kai. That he was a spy for renegade tribes. That his money was stolen. That he was here to stir up trouble. Thorn wanted him gone. He confronted Sheriff Brody in his office. That redskin is a menace, Thorn blustered, pacing in front of the sheriff's desk. He's turning people against me. You need to run him out of town. Vagrancy. Inciting unrest. Find something. Brody leaned back in his chair, his face weary. He had seen Kai. He had seen the quiet dignity, the lack of aggression. He had also seen Thorn's undisguised malice. His broken no laws, Bartholomew. In fact, he paid a citizen's debt. Seems to me he's a better citizen than most. Thorn's face purpled. Are you forgetting who owns the bank that holds the note on this town, Sheriff? Are you forgetting who pays the lion's share of the taxes that fund your salary? I remember my oath, Brody said quietly. To uphold the law. For everyone, then you're a fool, Thorn snarled, and stormed out. The threat was clear. Brody's conscience was becoming a liability. Thorn decided to take a more direct approach. He sent his 2 thugs to visit Kai at the boarding house. They cornered him in the stable as he was tending to his horse. Thorn wants you gone, the bigger one, a man named Jed, grunted. He thinks this town would be better off without your kind. Kai didn't stop brushing his horse's coat. He seemed to be giving the animal his full attention. My kind pays its debts, Kai said, his voice soft. What about his kind? The second thug, smaller and weaselly, chuckled. He owns this town. He don't have debts, he has accounts. And you're in the red. He wants you on the evening trail. Understand? Kai finally stopped and turned to face them. He moved with a liquid speed that was startling. One moment he was by the horse, the next he was in front of them, his obsidian eyes holding them in place. He wasn't armed, not visibly, but he radiated a coil danger that was more potent than any pistol. Tell Mr. Thorn, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, that I will leave when my business is concluded. And that he should be very careful. Some accounts, when they come due, are paid for with more than money. He looked from one man to the other, his gaze lingering just long enough to plant a seed of pure, primal fear in their hearts. They were bullies, used to preying on the weak. They were not prepared for this. They backed away, their bravado evaporating, and fled the stable. Kai watched them go, his face impassive. The time for quiet observation was over. Thorn had escalated. Now, so would he. He knew he couldn't simply buy Ilara's safety. He had to dismantle the very foundation of Thorn's power. He spent the next day visiting the other farmers in the valley, the ones he'd seen in the cowardly crowd. He didn't preach or promise. He listened. He heard their stories of predatory loans, of impossible interest rates, of how Thorn had used the drought to systematically trap them all. He learned that Thorn controlled the water rights to the only creek that hadn't run dry, and charged a fortune for a trickle of life-giving water. Ilara, hearing what he was doing, found him on the road back to town. What are you doing? She asked, her voice a mix of gratitude and fear for him. Why are you taking this risk? He stopped his horse and looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time since their charged encounter on her porch. He saw the strength that had been forged in hardship, the unwavering decency that had survived in this wasteland of greed. 15 years ago, he began, his voice low, a life was saved because of a small act of kindness. That life has incurred a debt of honor. I am here to see it paid in full. Ilara stared at him, confused. I don't understand. What life? What debt? Before he could answer, the dust on the road behind them was stirred by approaching riders. It was Thorn, with 4 of his men, including the 2 from the stable. This time, Thorn was not making threats. His face was a mask of cold fury. His public humiliation, the defiance of his men, and now Kai's open meddling with his other victims had pushed him past his limit. "Kai," he bellowed. "I warned you. This is my valley." He pulled his horse to a halt, his men fanning out, blocking the road. He looked at Ilara standing beside Kai, and a possessive rage contorted his features. "And you, girl? I should have known you were trouble. Consorting with this savage. You've made your choice." Ilara stood her ground, her chin high. "I choose decency, Mr. Thorn." "Something you know nothing about." Thorn's face tightened into a snarl. "There's no decency here. Only power." He drew his pistol, the click of the hammer cocking echoing in the sudden silence. "And I have the power. I am the law here." From down the road, another voice cut through the air. "No, you're not, Bartholomew." "I am." Sheriff Brody rode into view, his shotgun resting in the crook of his arm. He reined in his horse, positioning himself between Thorn's group and Kai and Ilara. His face was set, the conflict gone, replaced by a hard resolve. He had made his choice. Thorn stared at him in disbelief. "Brody, have you lost your mind? Stand aside." "I'm done standing aside while you bully and threaten good people," the sheriff said, his voice firm. "Put the gun away." Thorn hesitated, his eyes darting from Kai's unnerving calm to Brody's determined face. He was a coward at heart, a predator who only attacked when the odds were overwhelmingly in his favor. Now, they were even. With a curse, he lowered the pistol. But his eyes, fixed on Kai, burned with a venomous hatred. "This isn't over," he hissed. "This land will be mine. She will be mine. I will burn you all to the ground to get what I want." He yanked on his reins, wheeling his horse around, and galloped back toward town, his men trailing behind him. The threat was not idle. Kai knew it. Ilara knew it. A man like Thorn, when cornered and humiliated, did not retreat. He escalated. He would not settle for foreclosure now. He would seek utter destruction. The final confrontation was coming. It would not be about deeds or money. It would be about survival. That night, as a sliver of moon hung in an inky sky, Kai stood on the porch of the Vance homestead, keeping watch. He had refused to leave them, knowing Thorn's threat was real. Ilara brought him a cup of coffee. They stood in a comfortable silence for a moment, the vast, dark expanse of the prairie before them. "You never answered my question," she said softly. "The debt of honor. What did you mean?" Kai turned, his face illuminated by the faint moonlight. He reached into his coat, but this time he did not pull out a billfold. He pulled out a small, folded bundle of cloth. He carefully unfolded it. It was a piece of an old wool blanket, patched and worn thin with time, the colors faded to mere suggestions of blue and gray. It was unmistakably the blanket she had carried as a child, the one her grandmother had made for her, the one she had lost so long ago. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The memory, buried for 15 years, rushed back with stunning clarity. A dry creek bed. A bleeding boy with dark, terrified eyes. The small weight of the cornbread in her pocket. "You," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It was you gave me warmth when I was freezing," Kai said, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. "You gave me food when I was starving. You looked at me and saw a human boy, not an enemy. You saved my life, Ilara. Not just my body, but my soul. You gave me a reason to live, a debt to repay. Everything I have, everything I am, I owe to that little girl by the creek." And tears streamed down Ilara's face, tears of shock, of understanding, of a connection so profound it defied words. The quiet stranger was not a stranger at all. He was the ghost from her childhood, returned as a guardian. The mystery was solved, but the danger was greater than ever. It was then that they saw it. A flicker of orange against the dark horizon. Then another. It was coming from the direction of the town's shared grain silo, the one place all the small farmers stored their hope for the future. "Thorn," Kai said, his voice a low growl. He was making good on his promise. He was going to burn them all to the ground, starting with their livelihood. "Stay here. Bar the door," he commanded Ilara. He was already moving toward his horse, his body a fluid weapon of purpose. He was no longer the stoic protector. The sleeping giant was awake, and his wrath was aimed at the heart of the town's darkness. "What would you do if you saw your entire community's hope going up in flames, set by a man who wanted to own you? Tell me in the comments." The fire was a roaring beast devouring the night. Flames leaped from the roof of the grain silo, painting the sky in hellish strokes of orange and red. The crackle of burning timber was punctuated by the panicked shouts of the townspeople, who were gathering in the street, their faces a mixture of horror and helpless rage. Bartholomew Thorne stood near the inferno, his two main thugs beside him, their faces illuminated by the destructive glow. He looked triumphant, a debased emperor watching his enemy's city burn. This was his final, absolute statement of power. He wasn't just destroying their grain, he was incinerating their will to resist. When Kai rode into the town square, the buckskin horse moving through the chaos like a spirit of vengeance, Thorne turned, a cruel smile on his face. "Come to watch the show, have you?" or he sneered. "This is what happens when vermin try to build their nests in my field." Before Kai could answer, Sheriff Brody ran toward Thorne, his face grim with fury. "You've gone too far, Thorne. This is arson, attempted murder. You're under arrest." Thorne laughed. "You in what army, Sheriff?" "These people." He gestured to the stunned, defeated faces in the crowd. "They won't lift a finger. They know who feeds them." As if to prove his point, Thorne's other hired men, a half-dozen of them, emerged from the shadows of the alleyways, forming a line, cutting Brody off from the rest of the town. They were armed with clubs and knives. It was a trap. But Thorne had made a fatal miscalculation. He had judged the town by its past fear, not its present anger. And he had profoundly underestimated the man who now dismounted in the center of the square. Kai moved forward, walking into the firelight. He did not look at Thorne. He looked at the townspeople. He looked at the blacksmith, whose iron shipments had been stolen. He looked at the store owner, strangled by debt. He looked at every farmer who had been bled dry by Thorne's greed. "This man tells you he feeds you," Kai's voice rang out, clear and powerful over the roar of the fire. "He is wrong. You feed him. Your sweat, your labor, your hopes. He has taken your grain, but what he truly wants is your spirit. Will you let him have it?" A murmur went through the crowd. A spark of defiance. Thorne's smile faltered. "Shut him up," he ordered his men. Jed, the big thug, stepped forward, swinging a heavy wooden club. Kai met the charge not with brute force, but with breathtaking speed and precision. He sidestepped the clumsy swing, his hand shooting out to grip Jed's wrist. With a sharp twist, he used the man's own momentum against him, sending him crashing to the ground with a cry of pain. Another thug lunged with a knife. Kai moved like a dancer, deflecting the blade with his forearm and delivering a single, disabling blow to the man's throat. He moved through them not with the brawling style of a saloon fighter, but with the deadly efficiency of a warrior. He was a storm of focused, righteous violence. The townspeople watched, mesmerized. They were seeing something they had never seen before, Thorne's power being met and broken. Sheriff Brody, seeing his moment, raised his shotgun. "The law is not for sale tonight, Bartholomew. Stand with me," he yelled to the crowd. And then, the dam of fear broke. The blacksmith, a hulking man named Gunnar, let out a roar of rage and charged forward, swinging a heavy wrench he'd been carrying. Another farmer followed, then another. The cowardly crowd was no longer cowardly. They were a mob, fueled by years of repressed anger and humiliation, and inspired by the courage of the Comanche stranger and their sheriff. They swarmed Thorne's thugs, overwhelming them in a chaotic eruption of frontier justice. Thorne stood frozen in disbelief, his fortress of fear crumbling around him. He saw Kai advancing on him, his face a mask of cold judgment, his dark eyes seeming to burn with a fire hotter than the one raging behind him. Panic seized him. The greedy tyrant, stripped of his hired muscle, was nothing but a frightened, bloated old man. He turned and ran, scrambling toward the alley beside the burning silo. Kai pursued him. He caught him in the narrow space between two buildings, the fire on one side, a brick wall on the other. Thorn fell to his knees, blubbering. "Please, take the money, take anything. Just let me go." Kai looked down at the pathetic figure, and he saw the faces of the soldiers who had murdered his family. He saw the arrogance, the greed, the belief that they had the right to take and destroy. For a moment, a killing rage, the one he had buried for 15 years, threatened to consume him. His hands clenched into fists. He could end it. He could deliver the justice Thorn so richly deserved. But then, he saw another face. The face of a small girl with kind eyes, offering him a blanket. The face of Ilara, standing defiant on her porch. He had not survived the massacre to become a killer like them. He had survived to build, to protect, to honor the mercy he had been shown. He reached down, but not to strike. He hauled Thorn to his feet. "Your money is worthless here," Kai said, his voice low and final. "Your power is ash. These people, they will be your judge." He dragged the sputtering, terrified man back out into the square, where the last of his thugs had been subdued. The townspeople gathered around, their faces hard in the firelight. They weren't a mob anymore. They were a jury. Sheriff Brody stepped forward and put handcuffs on Thorn's wrists. "Bartholomew Thorn," he said, his voice ringing with authority. "You're under arrest for arson, conspiracy, and a list of other crimes so long it'll take the circuit judge a month to read it." The fire in the silo began to die down as men formed a bucket brigade from the town well, their movements now organized and purposeful. They were no longer victims. They were a community, reborn in the flames. Kai watched them, a sense of quiet completion settling over him. He felt a hand on his arm. It was Ilara. Her eyes were shining with tears, but also with an overwhelming pride and gratitude. "You saved us," she whispered. "You saved everyone. You saved me first," he replied, his gaze holding hers. A long time ago, in the cool light of the dawn, the smoldering ruins of the silo stood as a monument to the end of an era of fear. Thorn was locked in the town jail, awaiting trial. The townspeople, though facing a hard recovery, were filled with a new spirit. They worked together, clearing the debris, sharing what little they had, their conversations filled with plans for the future, not complaints about the past. Kai stood with Ilara and her father on the porch of their farmhouse. The air was clear, washed clean by the night's violent events. Abel Vance, his back straighter than it had been in years, shook Kai's hand with a tearful, heartfelt gratitude that needed no words. When he went back inside, Kai and Ilara were left alone. The patched blanket lay folded over the back of a porch chair, a silent testament to their shared history. "What will you do now?" she asked softly. "My business here is finished," he said. He looked out over the valley, at the land that had once been the site of his greatest pain. Now, it was the site of his greatest triumph, not of vengeance, but of redemption. He had not just settled a score, he had healed a wound, both in the town and in himself. "I have spent my life building a fortune out of nothing," he continued, turning to face her. "But it was always empty. It was a tool, not a life. You showed me what a life is. It's about building things that matter. Family. Community." Hopes. He took a step closer, his dark, serious eyes searching hers. "My journey began with a kindness you gave me. I would be honored if it could continue with you. Ilara Vance, I am not offering to buy your future or settle a debt. I am asking to share mine with you. I am asking for your hand." Ilara's heart swelled. This was not a proposal of convenience or gratitude. It was a joining of two souls who had found each other across a gulf of time and tragedy. She thought of the boy in the creek bed and the man who stood before her now, two halves of the same incredible story. Her story. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, Kai." He reached out and gently took her hand, his calloused fingers lacing with hers. It felt like coming home. They stood together on the porch, looking out at the new day, two survivors who had not only reclaimed their lives, but had forged a new one together, founded not on what had been lost in the fire, but on the enduring warmth of a simple blanket, given in an act of grace so many years ago. The debt was finally, truly, paid in full. Kai showed that true strength isn't about power over others, but the courage to repay kindness and uplift a community. If you were inspired by his story of honor and redemption, click on our next video for another tale that will touch your heart, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspirational stories.